Technology reshapes everything. AI, cloud systems, cybersecurity, the future of work. We don't guess here. Wealth building, money psychology, financial freedom. The conversations they don't want you having. Engineered with ruthless accuracy. Every word verified, every claim backed. Modern love, intimacy, dating dynamics, real human connection in a disconnected world. Truth about attraction, truth about belonging. 4 pillars. Endless conversations. Research-driven, LM-enhanced, human-validated. No fluff, no filler, just truth. We cut through the noise. Research-driven conversations. Truth delivered hard. Spirituality, discipline, mindset. Becoming who you're meant to be. Endless conversations. No filler. Stay curious. Welcome to the Robert Judat podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Robert Judat podcast, available on Spotify and all other major platforms.
Imagine this, right? A $30,000 metal box.
Okay.
And it's just completely abandoned in some Melbourne server rack. Like it's a piece of hardware that was officially discontinued a whole decade ago.
Which is wild in itself.
Right. Now imagine that exact same box silently deciding out of nowhere that it is the year 2006. And that single, tiny mathematical glitch just instantly wipes out half the mobile phone service of an entire continent.
I mean, it sounds like the plot of a bad cyber thriller.
It really does. But that's exactly what happened to Australia on July 8, 2026.
Yeah, it's a pretty stunning reality check. Because, we tend to view modern telecommunications as this impenetrable fortress of cutting-edge technology.
Yeah, totally.
But when you actually peel back the layers, you realize these multi-billion-dollar networks are, they're often functioning a lot like a precarious Jenga tower.
Right, where the foundational blocks are just like 15-year-old software patches that nobody even remembers how to fix anymore. Well, welcome to this deep dive, custom-tailored just for you. Today, our mission is to unpack that massive Telstra network outage that basically crippled Australia.
Yeah, we really want to figure out how a completely predictable mathematical quirk, compounded by just staggering human error, brought the country's largest network to its knees.
And to do this, we're pulling from a really comprehensive stack of sources. We've got mainstream news reporting from Channel News and The Guardian.
We're also looking at the official government statements, right? From the telecommunications industry ombudsman and the V-Line train network.
Right, along with some pretty heavy critiques from consumer advocacy groups like ASICAN and PerSL.
Yeah, and we've got the deep technical analysis from WhistleOut, too.
But honestly, my favorite source for this entire deep dive is this brutally honest, highly technical Reddit thread from Verzi Sadman.
Oh, the Reddit thread is incredible.
It really is. That's where actual IT professionals have been dissecting this whole disaster with this, level of dark humor that just tells you everything you need to know about corporate tech culture. So, okay. Let's unpack this.
Right. Well, we have to start with the timeline that was established during the emergency Senate inquiry.
Right.
Telstra CEO, Vicki Brady, actually walked the committee through the exact sequence of events, and it began at 3:38 a.m. on Wednesday, July 8th.
So right in the dead of night, down in a Melbourne data center, you've got these maintenance crews working on a piece of equipment. And they aren't doing anything radical, right?
No, not at all. According to the testimony, they were just simply replacing a faulty backup power chassis.
Right, literally just swapping out a power supply case. But to do that safely, you have to power down the server.
Yeah, standard procedure.
So they pull the plug, swap the part, and at 3:38 a.m., they turn the machine back on.
But that reboot sequence... that is what awakened this dormant glitch, because the equipment they were restarting was this microchip SSU 2000.
Which is also referenced as a Symmetricom Sync Server S300, right?
Yes, exactly. And this is a highly specialized, very expensive piece of hardware. And its sole job is to manage network time.
Okay.
It basically keeps the entire telecom network perfectly synchronized by pulling data from atomic clocks on GPS satellites.
Which sounds incredibly robust.
It does sound robust.
Yeah.
Until you run into a known technical limitation called a GPS week rollover event.
Okay, a what?
A GPS week rollover. So the way this specific older generation of GPS receiver technology tracks time is by counting weeks.
Okay.
But it uses a 10-bit binary counter. And in computer architecture, a 10-bit counter has a hard mathematical ceiling. It can only count from 0 up till numbers in 23.
Oh, I see. So it literally only has 1,024 slots available to store the weak number.
Precisely. Once it hits week 1024, it just runs out of memory space, maxes out, and mathematically rolls back to 0. Yeah, and a cycle of 1024 weeks takes about 19.69 years. So when that maintenance crew restarted the time server in Melbourne, it queried the GPS, hit that mathematical ceiling, and essentially time traveled.
It went back in time.
Yep. The device forcefully reset its internal clock back to the year 2006.
Okay, I want to make sure I really understand the mechanics of this because it sounds exactly like an old car's mechanical odometer.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it.
Like, you drive a car for 999,999 miles, and the moment you drive that one additional mile, all the physical dials just click back to these in thousand.
Right.
The car didn't magically become brand new. You know, the dashboard just ran out of digits to display the actual truth.
It is very similar to an odometer, yes, but with a highly dangerous twist. Because when a car's odometer rolls over to 0, the engine keeps running, right? The transmission still shifts.
Yeah, the car still works.
Exactly. But in a modern telecommunications network, time isn't just the dashboard display. Time is the engine itself.
And that is exactly my pushback here. Like, why does the year 2006 mean I can't make a phone call in 2026?
It's a fair question.
I mean, if my microwave clock resets after a power outage and just blinks the wrong time, it still heats up my coffee. Why does an incorrect date cause a multi-billion-dollar phone network to completely shut down?
Well, what's fascinating here is the downstream ripple effect. See, in modern data networks, time is the absolute foundation of cryptographic security.
Okay.
So when that Melbourne server woke up and determined it was 2006, it immediately started broadcasting that incorrect date out to hundreds of downstream interconnected systems.
Oh, wow. So it's actively poisoning the rest of the network with the wrong time.
It is.
Yeah.
And those downstream systems, they rely on tightly synchronized time to validate authentication certificates.
So security stuff.
Right. Think of a security certificate like a highly secure digital passport. Whenever a server or a cell tower or even your phone tries to connect to the broader network, the network checks that digital passport.
Okay, that makes sense.
But because the core time server is now screaming that it is the year 2006, all of those digital passports out there, which were legitimately issued in, say, 2025, suddenly look mathematically impossible.
Oh, I see. The network looks at a completely valid security certificate and says, wait a minute, this passport claims it was issued in 2025, but the master clock says it's 2006.
Exactly.
This passport was issued 20 years in the future. It must be a forgery, so I'm rejecting the connection.
That is the exact mechanism of failure. The network's own security protocols rapidly turned against it.
That's terrifying.
Yeah, the 2006 date just propagated across the infrastructure, causing massive, widespread authentication failures. Systems just refused to talk to each other.
And it happened fast, didn't it?
Very fast.
Yeah.
By 4:20 a.m., which is just 40 minutes after the server was turned on, this time travel glitch had wiped out 45% of all voice calls and data sessions on Telstra's national mobile network.
Nearly half of an entire nation's network just vaporized. Because a clock forgot what year it was.
Basically, yeah.
But, you know, if this 10-bit binary counter is a known mathematical limitation, which it clearly is, I mean, it sounds exactly like the Y2K bug, then this absolutely shouldn't have been a surprise to anyone in the IT department.
It wasn't a surprise at all. And this is where the incident moves from, like, a fascinating computer quirk into a really profound failure of human management.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Because the reporting from the Australian Financial Review and Channel News, it makes the timeline undeniable. The U.S. manufacturer of this specific device, microchip technology, they explicitly warned global carriers about this exact rollover event.
Wait, they sent a warning. How far in advance?
They sent out an official technical bulletin in January 2026.
So a full 6 months before the Melbourne outage.
Exactly. Microchip explained clearly that these specific older models would experience a week rollover between December 2025 and January 2027.
And they knew it would happen.
The bulletin spelled out exactly what the consequence would be. The system would roll back in time 1,024 weeks, and most crucially, there would be no system alarms to indicate the date had failed.
Wait, no alarms. The server would just silently decide it was 2006 and not trigger a single red flashing light in the control room.
None. That is the insidious nature of the bug. It fails silently. Now, Channel News reported that other major Australian networks, including Optus and PPG, received this exact same alert.
And I'm guessing they actually did something about it.
They did. TPG physically replaced the affected hardware entirely back in 2024.
Okay, good.
And Optus assessed their own network, identified the vulnerability, and they worked with the vendor to deploy a software patch in April of 2026.
So Telstra appears to be the only major carrier that just left the hardware unpatched and in active service.
It seems that way, yeah.
Because the Senate hearing revealed a massive twist regarding why Telstra didn't just apply the software patch like Optus did. According to CEO Vicki Brady, they couldn't just apply the fix normally because of, in quote, undocumented design change.
Yes, and this detail from the Guardian's coverage is vital because a telecommunications network, it's constantly being tweaked and modified over decades, right?
Sure.
So apparently years ago, Telstra experienced a different, totally unrelated fault on this specific time server in Melbourne. And to bypass that old fault, some network engineer implemented a design change.
Right.
They altered how the server queried its time sources, forcing it to behave differently than the standard manufacturer design. But whoever made that change never wrote it down. It was completely undocumented.
Okay, let me break down the real-world consequence of that. You have a maintenance crew at 3:30 in the morning swapping out a power supply, and they are completely flying blind.
Exactly.
They didn't know the hardware was uniquely hardwired. And according to Telstra's defense, the management team thought the software patch for the GPS rollover wasn't necessary because that update affected a feature they just assumed was turned off.
Right, but because of that undocumented change made years prior, the vulnerable feature was actually the primary time source.
Oh, wow.
So when the power supply was swapped, the spoofers went through its default boot sequence, pinged the raw GPS feed, hit the week 1024 wall, and crashed the network.
It's just a cascading series of human failures masking themselves as a sudden technical fault.
It really is.
And this is exactly the dynamic that the IT professionals on Reddit locked onto. The Lursey Sadman thread on this outage is just a gold mine of absolute exasperation.
Oh, I bet.
You have network engineers pointing out the staggering absurdity of the situation. Like, this piece of critical infrastructure holding up a multi-billion-dollar national network was a $30,000 server manufactured in 2011.
A decade out of date.
Right. The manufacturer officially discontinued it in 2016.
It is a perfect encapsulation of what the industry calls technical debt.
Technical debt.
Yeah, consumers rarely see this reality of enterprise IT. One user on that Reddit thread articulated it perfectly. In massive corporations, you frequently have critical load-bearing services running on ancient end-of-life hardware.
Because they don't want to pay to fix it.
Exactly. The engineers on the ground know it's a ticking time bomb. They warn management constantly. But replacing it requires spending money. And more importantly, it requires taking a critical system offline for a maintenance window.
Which executives are terrified to do.
Right.
So they just shove it into a risk register. That phrase kept popping up in the Reddit thread.
A risk register, yeah.
It's basically a corporate spreadsheet where you write down a massive vulnerability and executive management just signs off on acknowledging the risk so they can save cash and avoid downtime.
It's like sweeping it under the rug, but officially.
Think about how many times you, the listener, have clicked Remind Me Tomorrow on a software update for your laptop because you just didn't want to restart it.
We all do it.
Now imagine doing that for an entire country's emergency communications network. One sysadmin commenter literally wrote, "A time server going end of life 9 years ago and nobody bothered to check for GPS rollover is peak enterprise IT."
It is dark humor, for sure. But it underscores a terrifying reality about our infrastructure. Because while IT professionals might, cynically laugh at a bureaucratic spreadsheet failure, the real-world consequences for you, the general public, were incredibly severe.
Oh, absolutely. This wasn't a minor inconvenience where people couldn't refresh their social media feeds.
No. The failure of this single aging box paralyzed physical infrastructure.
Let's look at the sheer scale of the fallout. The regional train networks in Victoria and New South Wales, the V-Line, the telecommunication links that the train dispatchers rely on completely failed.
They had no way to communicate.
Right, so the entire regional train network was forced to grind to a halt for safety reasons. It was so disruptive that the Victorian government and V-Line had to launch a massive compensation program just to reimburse stranded passengers for the cost of finding alternative transport.
And as bad as the transportation chaos was, it really pales in comparison to the most critical failure of that morning.
The emergency calls.
Yeah. During the outage, 604 000 emergency calls failed to connect over the Telstra network.
604 people dialing for police, fire, or an ambulance in the middle of the night and getting a dead screen.
Just think about that. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it brings us to a highly controversial safety mechanism called emergency roaming.
Or what the telecom industry calls camping on, right?
Exactly. Under Australian regulations, if your primary network goes down, your mobile phone is legally required to search for any other available network like an Optus or Vodafone tower and camp onto their infrastructure to force the emergency call through.
And during the Senate inquiry, Telstra CEO Vicki Brady initially leaned heavily on this safety net. She insisted that affected customers simply camped onto alternative networks and completed their emergency calls.
She presented it as a seamless backup plan.
Right.
However, the actual data that Telstra was forced to submit to the committee heavily contradicted the confidence of her claim.
Because it didn't work for most people?
No, it didn't. Out of the 604 failed 000 calls on the Telstra network, only 172 successfully camped onto the Optus or Vodafone networks.
That leaves 432 emergency calls that just vanished into the void. Like, how does a CEO even attempt to defend a failure rate like that?
The full context of those failed handoffs is still being investigated, actually. It remains unclear if those callers were in regional areas where Telstra was the only physical tower for miles, or if the technological handoff mechanism itself just failed under pressure.
Right.
But Whistleout and PEROSL, which is the Personal Emergency Response Services Limited Advocacy Group, they highlighted a deeply concerning reality about how emergency roaming actually works.
The delay.
Yes. Telstra advised the committee that in an outage, an affected phone might take up to 90 seconds to realize its home network is dead, abandon the connection, and then find an alternative tower to camp on.
90 seconds. Let's just pause on that. Imagine you are in the middle of a medical emergency, or a home invasion, or a house fire. You dialed 000. 90 seconds of dead silence while your phone desperately tries to authenticate with a broken tower is an absolute eternity.
It is the literal difference between life and death.
The fallout from those failed calls was so serious that Telstra was legally forced to conduct welfare checks on all 604 callers. And 144 of those situations were deemed serious enough that they required actual police intervention to drive out and physically check on the people who tried to call for help.
It is a stark, uncomfortable reminder of our complete dependence on this invisible infrastructure. I mean, by 10 a.m. that morning, they managed to restore 90% of the network, and by 4 p.m., the issue was fully resolved.
So they fixed it pretty quickly once they knew what it was.
Right. The technical fix, isolating the rogue 2006 server and bypassing it, that was relatively fast once they figured out what was poisoning the network. But the regulatory fallout from those failed emergency calls, that is just beginning.
So what does this all mean? When the dust settles, how does a corporation the size of Telstra justify this to the government?
Well, CEO Vicki Brady took a very specific corporate stance. She offered deep apologies, stating unequivocally that Telstra let Australians down.
Naturally.
But she simultaneously defended the company by pointing to the inherent complexity of the modern world.
Oh, of course.
She argued that mobile networks are incredibly complex, fast-evolving environments. Her exact defense to the Senate was, no telco around the world could guarantee that there will be zero outages.
And honestly, the Senate committee was not having it. Senator Sarah Hanson-Young offered a blistering critique that completely dismantled that, aw shucks, technology is complicated defense.
Yeah, she brought the receipts.
She really did. The senator pointed out that Telstra reported 3,641 network outages in 2024. Then they reported 5,221 outages in 2025. The frequency of the outages is rapidly increasing. And simultaneously, Telstra banked a $2.3 billion profit in 2025. That is a 31% increase in profit, while their reliability is measurably dropping. The argument was basically, you cannot excuse catastrophic failures, blame the complexity of the universe, and pocket billions of dollars in profit.
And that exact frustration is being echoed powerfully by consumer advocates across the country.
Right.
The telecommunications industry ombudsman issued a statement noting that consumers are exhausted and shouldn't have to do the heavy lifting of fighting for compensation after a major outage. But the most pointed structural critique came from ACCAN, the peak communications consumer body.
Right. Carol Bennett, the CEO of ACCAN, she didn't hold back at all.
Not even a little.
No.
She tackled Telstra's complexity argument head-on. She basically stated that complexity is neither an adequate excuse for failing to invest in known risks, nor is it a compelling case for less government regulation. If a multi-billion-dollar company knows a server is 10 years past its expiration date, and they receive a manufacturer warning 6 months in advance that its internal clock is going to shatter the network.
That's not a complex mystery.
No, That is not a complex, unavoidable technological mystery. That is a conscious failure of executive management.
Yeah.
And this raises an important question. If telecom companies prioritize profit and risk registers over critical infrastructure, who steps in to regulate them? Because right now, the telecommunications sector in Australia operates under an entirely different set of rules than other essential utilities.
That is the core of ACCAN's argument, isn't it?
Yeah.
They want telecom treated like water or electricity.
Exactly. ACCAN is aggressively calling for telecommunications to be regulated in a manner befitting a life-or-death essential service.
Which it clearly is.
Right. Think about your energy provider or your water provider. They are required by strict government law to meet precise targets for the duration and frequency of outages.
Yeah, if the water company fails to maintain their infrastructure and a neighborhood goes dry, there are massive automatic financial penalties levied against the company.
Exactly. And ACCAN is arguing that it is time to apply that same regulatory stick to the telecommunications sector. They want clear, enforceable reliability standards.
Because right now, the consequences for Telstra are essentially just a bad PR week.
Pretty much.
They do an apology tour in the Senate, offer their affected customers a bit of account credit for a few days of lost service, and move on. Meanwhile, the network they manage is critical for the functioning of banks, hospitals, and the police. It just doesn't make sense that they're allowed to self-regulate when the stakes are this high.
Furthermore, advocacy groups like ACAN and PERSL are pushing for something even more structural: mandated domestic mobile roaming.
So we talked about emergency roaming for 000, but what does mandated domestic roaming mean for everyday use?
It means removing the corporate silos entirely during an emergency. So if you are a Telstra customer and you travel to a regional area where only Optus has built a tower, your phone would automatically connect to the Optus tower for standard data and calls, rather than leaving you with no service.
That makes total sense.
Right. Or, more importantly, for a scenario like the July 8 outage, if the entire Telstra network collapses, your phone would seamlessly transition to TPG, Vodafone, or Optus for everything, not just 000 calls.
Right.
PRSL highlighted that vulnerable Australians, the elderly, and those who depend on life-saving medical alerts and personal emergency response systems desperately need this kind of cross-network redundancy. They cannot be left stranded for 90 seconds while their hardware tries to figure out if the network is dead.
Because relying on a single corporate network to never fail, especially when we know they are ignoring their own risk registers, is proving to be a highly dangerous gamble.
It absolutely is.
So to bring this all together, we started today looking at a massive, seemingly inexplicable network collapse. An outage that vaporized 45% of Australia's largest mobile network, stopped regional train lines in their tracks, and blocked hundreds of terrifying emergency calls.
Right. And we traced that massive fallout back to an entirely predictable mathematical quirk: a 10-bit counter inside a $30,000 discontinued metal box in Melbourne.
Unbelievable.
A box that was ignored by management, subjected to undocumented design changes by long-gone engineers, and left unpatched despite a 6-month explicit warning from the manufacturer.
It is the ultimate cautionary tale for the modern age. I mean, you can hold a state-of-the-art $1,000 smartphone in your hand, a device capable of facial recognition, artificial intelligence, global video calling.
A supercomputer.
Yeah, but ultimately that supercomputer is entirely at the mercy of invisible, aging, fragile infrastructure. A forgotten 15-year-old server that suddenly thinks it's 2006 can turn your incredible phone into a very expensive, very useless piece of glass.
It really puts the push for strict utility-style regulations into sharp perspective.
It certainly does.
And it leaves us with a rather unsettling final thought to mull over, honestly.
What's that?
Well, if a single unpatched end-of-life server sitting quietly in a rack in Melbourne can silently fail and take down half of a nation's telecommunications, what other invisible, outdated hardware is quietly ticking past its expiration date right now?
Oh, wow.
What else is sitting on a corporate risk register, being intentionally ignored by executives to save a few dollars, silently running the power grids, the traffic lights, and the hospital systems that you trust your life with every single day?
That is definitely something to think about the next time you look at the bars on your phone, or hit Remind Me Tomorrow on an update. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Thank you for listening to Robert Judat Podcast. Subscribe to be notified of the upcoming episodes. Available on Spotify and all other major platforms.